It was a dark and stormy night. All of the Boy Scouts were huddled around a fire, and they said, leader, tell us a scary story. And he said, okay. And so it began. It was a dark and stormy night. All of the Boy Scouts were huddled around a fire, and they said, leader, tell us a scary story. And he said, all right. And so it began. It was a dark and stormy night. All of the Boy Scouts were huddled around a fire. And they said, leader, tell us a scary story. And he said, all right. When I got told that the series was going to be called Campfire Stories, I was stoked, mainly for the reason that I got to tell that story. I had no idea which direction they wanted to go or what they wanted me to say or what kind of stories they wanted. I just was like, man, I finally get to tell my scary story that has absolutely no point. One thing to know is I am a youngest sibling, so my goal in life is to be annoying if you ever had a younger sibling. So I get to be it. My name is Sheldon Richardson. If you don't know me, I'm an electrician in town. I've also been coming to Connect now for about 6 years. I'm currently a volunteer leader with Gravity Youth Group within Connect, as well as with the setup team really early in the morning on Sunday at about 7 a.m. Exactly, there we go. So we're starting a series this week called Campfire Stories. If you haven't figured that out already, we've got a campfire. The idea of the series will be telling stories, telling our stories, telling stories about God through the Bible, through our stories as well. So I want to start today is about 9 years ago. And what you need to know up to this point in my life is that I had gone to church as a child, and I knew about the idea of God and about Jesus, but I just wasn't sure. Right around this time, I was the toughest guy you could try to be. I was learning how to fight. I watched UFC. I picked fights in school. I got in trouble in school. I yelled at teachers. Really, the only thing I needed was a leather jacket and slicked back hair. But I was not in a good place, and I knew it. I knew it, but at the same time, I didn't know it. Because on the outside and in my mind, I told myself that I was great, I was good, I was happy. But I felt emptiness of not knowing God anymore. But in my mind, obviously, it didn't show it. I had an unbreakable group of friends. There was 4 of us. And all of us knew our role. We knew where we stood. But at the same time, we also had an unreal amount of respect and trust for each other that could not be broken. And this group of friends, about 9 years ago, we finished grade 9, and we were moving up in the world. We were moving to Mount Baker from Laurie, which in that case is a big step. We were entering a whole new stage of life, even though it really wasn't. It was still school. And I was in this mood this summer about just relaxing and not doing much, which we can all enjoy. And at the time, I wasn't fit. Not saying I am now, but at the time, I wasn't fit, and all I wanted to do was play my video games in my basement. And I became a hermit. I lived in the dark. I lived in the basement. I just played hours and hours of video games. And I also remember this summer also turning down a lot of times to go out and hang out with friends. I would get phone calls over and over again, like, hey, come hang out. And I'd be like, no, I'm busy, while holding a controller. I'd be like, I have to go to work, I have chores. And yeah, sometimes it was true, but most of the time it wasn't. And then one time I came home from work, and I remember logging into Facebook, which at the time was new. It was the new world of Facebook. And I logged in, and I remember reading statuses and scrolling through statuses. And as I read, I was noticing this trend that was picking up. I was seeing a lot of condolences or a lot of rest in peace, a lot of love towards a family, which obviously a social network, I hadn't seen that at that point. And it took me a few minutes to realize the name that was coming up. But when I realized it, I realized that it was one of the 4 friends that I had. Well, not that I had, but like one of the 4 of the group. And at 14 years old, I was absolutely destroyed. I didn't know how to react. I wasn't sure what to say at the time. I remember phoning the family just because I wanted confirmation. I didn't want Facebook to tell me. And when I phoned and they told me, I kind of disappeared for the next little while. I kind of spiraled into this dark world of mine where I didn't want to trust anyone anymore, and not opening up to anyone anymore. And of course, I was in a new school, a new world, and so the world seemed so different without my friend and without the old school that I didn't want any part of it. Despite lots of support from family, friends of the family, and even the family, I still didn't want anything to do with any of it. I mean, I knew God existed, and I knew that his like in these moments, his love is supposed to show up, but I didn't like him, and I didn't want any part of whatever box that he was in, because he destroyed my world. This kind of feeling that I'm kind of talking about is actually expressed in the beginning of the Bible, and it's expressed in one of the first books in Genesis, where it talks about Noah and the ark. And if you don't know the story of Noah and the ark, there's lots of ways to learn this story. There's a lot of movies. There's like Evan Almighty, where it tells like a modern version of Noah. There's also Noah, which oddly enough explains the story of Noah, as in the title. Anyways, in Genesis chapter 6, we're just getting into the idea of Noah building the boat or building the ark. And God explains to Noah how large to build it. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 15, he says, "This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high." Now, we don't measure houses anymore in cubits for good reasons. We measure it in feet. To explain this, it was about 450 feet long and 75 feet wide and about 45 feet high. And another way to describe it, it was about a football field and a half long. It was about half of a football field wide, and it was about 4 stories high. Seems kind of large, but in the retrospect, it's such a specific box that God can save. And that's how I felt about God. That if you wanted God to save you, it was only in this small, specific area that you could be saved, that only certain parts of the world could be saved. This is why I felt so alone. This is why I spiraled into a dark world. Recalling the night that I finally had enough isn't hard. The night that I gave up. And I don't necessarily like talking about it all the time, but it happened. I came to the idea that I needed to call my friends and say goodbye to my family. And it was hard, because I just couldn't fit into what I believed God's box was. Through that moment of weakness, and for about the next week after that, I actually saw God work. For the first time in a long time, I saw him work and expand more than this ark box that I knew him to be in. Through my mom and my dad, I saw God try to fight to reach me. And also, I saw God try to fight to reach me through other people, through the professionals that tried to help me and all this kind of stuff. And the recovery wasn't easy by any means, but it did become more worth it to live. And I remember that feeling. Over the next few years, I would actually start to go to a thing called Young Life and learn more about the Bible, read more into the Bible, learn more about God and how he works, and see how he works through other people and through the world and through his beauty in the world. I finally realized the kind of area we live in and how easy it is to see God. Like, it's a gorgeous world. Even if it's on fire, like it's still a beautiful world. And it was a journey, and it was exciting, and it was new, and it was unreal. God wasn't what I remembered. He wasn't just some guy in a fairy tale written in an ancient book. He was something real something that I could understand. So after we graduated, after grade 12, moving into the summer, I actually got baptized because I loved God. And it felt so cool. I felt God's love like I had never felt before. But at the same time, I didn't understand it yet. Freshly reborn, I felt the need to volunteer. I got involved at what was the time Kids Zone with Connect. And one thing, I taught in the grade 2s and 3s. And one thing, like a cool story with the grade 2s and 3s working in Kids Zone, was at the time Alec Hackett was in the grade 2s and 3s, and now he's in Gravity with us. And it's kind of cool seeing that transition as they grow up. As Frank would say, it was kind of like a moment. But this is why you got to get involved. This is the kind of moments when you have those mind-blowing moments. It's cool when you see God's love work like that. But I was helping out with Kids Zone and attending church on a regular basis. Like I said, I was feeling God's love in a whole new way again. But it still didn't feel right. As we move through the Bible, as we move through away from the beginning, we move into the story, like into the book of 1 Kings. And to kind of explain 1 Kings, where I'm about to pick up, is there's a story that you might have heard called David and Goliath. The idea of a little man fighting a big man and winning, taking on the big man and winning. He threw one stone, he killed Goliath. It was an epic story. It's been told before. And David eventually becomes king over Israel. And then he passes away and he makes his son Solomon king. And that's where I pick up, is Solomon is now king, and he's feeling called by God to build a temple or a church. The first church. That's the one thing to understand, is up to this point, there has been no temple or church. Somewhere where the Holy Spirit resides permanently, where God is always. So he feels called to build this temple or build this church. And we pick up in 1 Kings 6:2. It says, "The temple of the king shall be built for the Lord with 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high." Again, we don't measure in cubits, which is okay. Like, if we did, that would be one thing, but we don't. So it was actually about 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The cool thing, though, about this idea of a temple or this idea of a church was that God was where the church was. So that's where I hung out. After I got baptized, I hung out at the church because that's where God was. I had moved away from this idea that God saves in a specific box, in a specific ark. And I moved into this idea that wherever the church was, that's where God was. And that's my point today. If you don't take anything else out of my story, that's the point. We try to box God in, but God's love is actually everywhere. It's not in an ark, it's not in a church. It's everywhere. The past few years of my story, I would say, have been the most exciting. I've progressed, and there's been some excellent points before, but the past few years have been the most exciting, with lots of learning. I learned working with younger kids, like below grade 7, is not my fit. It's just not my game. But I was meant to work with a younger generation. I started working with Young Life, the group that I considered that saved me. And I was working through this process, and I was really learning a lot of stuff about myself doing this, how I handled certain situations, and if I was fit for doing something like it. This leadership role would eventually turn into leading a team with Wildlife, which is just a younger branch within Young Life. But at the time, it was actually a lot of work. 18, 19-year-old me, I remember getting tired and grumpy and stubborn. I'm still stubborn, but I was super grumpy and hard to work with, and I remember this feeling. And I remember moving back towards that box of Noah's Ark, that specific, God can't reach me here where I am. God can only reach a certain specific area of the world. Possibly something that I would never be able to attain. I was not, however, the first person who picked up on something getting me down or something bringing me down, and it never will be. It will always be your friends or your family or your loved ones who pick up on it first. Brianna, my girlfriend at the time, picked up that it was getting me down. And she helped me decide a decision that was hard at the time, but I stepped down from my position. And I had to relearn a couple things with my life. Almost immediately after, though, within a few months, I felt a call to another youth group. Right from one youth group, right into the next. And at the time, it was actually Connect Youth, so I was getting involved, which Connect Youth would eventually become Gravity. So I talked to Frankie Holes here at the church, and I did all the things that I needed to do to help out. But the cool part about this time, about leading a new youth group, was that I wasn't leading it on my own, in my own adventure with God. This time, Brianna wanted to lead the group as well. And so I felt like way more comfortable because I was doing it with someone I loved. And of course, at the time, being Christian made things easy and just smooth out. That's the end of the story. Have a good day. No, I'm kidding. While all this changing youth groups was happening, secretly yet not secretly, God was changing the whole pattern of my life. Right after high school, I jumped right into college, into psychology, and I was determined to get a psych degree that would eventually morph into a law degree, because that's what I wanted to do, and I really did enjoy it at first. However, what I did not enjoy was sitting in a class day after day, looking at a board and writing essay after essay, paper after paper. Eventually, I sat down and I had to come to the decision. Right around the same time I decided to leave Young Life, I was also deciding to leave my degree or leave the school that I was in. And it was hard to tell my parents, like, hey, we put all this time and this money into this, but I'm no longer going to be pursuing this. And I left it. I tossed it aside. I had to move into something new. So in a matter of months, I went from leading a team with wildlife and working towards a psychology degree to a Connect Youth leader and wanting to be in the trades and be an electrician, which was like a 180 flip for me and took me a long time to figure out exactly what I was doing. Since that point in my life, it's been a whirlwind of events. I slumped into a sad bump in my life as Brianna traveled halfway around the world to Australia and learned about God in YWAM. To when she got back, we got engaged, and we got asked at that time to potentially take over Gravity within the next few years, to within a couple weeks from that point being asked, oh, actually, you guys might take over Gravity in a few months. And it was just a whirlwind, and then we got married, and it was just exciting and so crazy as everything kind of happened, and we had to figure things out as it came at us, though. But one thing stayed constant. There was always hard times, always moments as I progressed that became difficult to process or difficult to understand. And I would slump into these moments where God and I just did not see eye to eye. And they still happen. And honestly, I didn't want any part of God at some of those points. And it just didn't seem fair. The last part of the Bible that I kind of want to bring up is how Jesus destroyed that box of like Noah's Ark, that box where we can be saved. He also destroyed the idea of God's love only being in the church. Jesus, he wrecked it. Despite all of my fails or all of my falls, I believed God was unattainable and I tried to kill myself, but God saved me. And I attempted to learn, and I thought I knew more about God, and I thought I knew tons about God, but I still boxed him in, and I fell short. I became exhausted over and over again as I was learning. But Jesus helped open that box and reveal to me that he will find me wherever I am or wherever we are. He'll help us whatever stage we're in life. In 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7, it says, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects, always trusts, and always hopes. It always perseveres. Right into another verse. In Romans 12, verse 9, it says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And right into another one. In 1 John, chapter 4, verse 8, it says, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Jesus is love. So Jesus, back to that 1 Corinthians verse, Jesus is patient. God is patient. He's kind. He does not envy. He does not boast. He does not hold on to what you did wrong. He does what you did right. That kind of love is not contained inside of a box of an ark. It is also not just contained inside of a church that we come to every Sunday morning, but it is wherever we are. Every time I enter into a new mood of, I'm sad and I don't want help, and I get grumpy and I push back and I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to deal with God anymore. I even get into moments where I feel like I don't want to volunteer anymore. It's hard, but I push through it because God hears my cries. He hears my family's cries when I get these kind of moods. And He helps me. He finds me wherever I am, and He helps me get through it. And He does not boast when He succeeds, mainly because He knows that I will boast for Him. He does not resent or judge anything that I have done in the past. He just loves. Because He is love. He's patient. He's kind. As much as we try to box God in, God's love truly is everywhere, and you can't do anything about it. Despite everything that I went through, every time I gave up, to every time that I learned, to everything I'm still learning, God's always going to be there. And that's my story today. Just how I kind of dealt with things. And as I learned and what I learned. So I just want to pray quickly, and then we get to go out and enjoy the sun, smoky air. But you can enjoy your Sunday. So let me just pray quickly. God, I just pray to see your love. I pray for thanks, and I just thank you to finding us wherever we are and being there for us despite everything that we might do. I just thank you for not being contained inside of a box and not being only savable to a certain few, but savable to us all. I just pray for your love today for everyone in this room, and I just pray for an amazing day. In your name I pray, amen. So next week, I believe Scott is coming up here to tell his story. So we'll see you next week. Enjoy your week.